Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. And for those of you who have not checked out my program before, if you go check out the archives on whatever podcasting app you like to listen to, you can find some great interviews with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from companies and organizations ranging from Netflix to Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard. Recently, we had Quicken, we had Grubhub, we had Redfin. We got some good guests recently, so check out those archives. I'm also the co-founder of Rise.5, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And my guest here today is Julie Broad. She is the president of Book Launchers. It's a company that helps others to publish and launch a book. And she's an author and speaker, former real estate investor and trainer. That's how she got into writing books. And she got into helping others to write books because of her own personal experience. She self-published her own book in 2013 because she'd been rejected by traditional publishers. It kind of gave her the whole rigmarole. We'll talk about that in a second. And she realized that she didn't need to be, quote unquote, blessed from the traditional publishers, and now helps others to get their books and their message out into the world and get good results from it. So we're going to talk about, kind of unpack how that works. Of course, this episode brought to you by Rise.5, my company, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can go to our website at rise25.com to learn all about what we do. All right, Julie, pleasure to have you here. And tell us about this story. So you were in real estate investing and training. You helped others in the real estate world, and you had an idea for a book, and you went around. I've heard this story before. You know, you go to the traditional publishers, but you actually had one that like took you down a whole different road. They're like, okay, we have this other idea for you. And you spent 3 months developing that idea. And then they were like, nah, we changed our mind. That's awful. So tell us about how that happened.
Yeah, I was actually introduced to a couple of publishers. So I wasn't even necessarily pursuing it, but I of course had a book idea when they said, hey, like, you ever thought of writing a book? I was like, yes. And I told them my idea, and both publishers went, no, like that's been done before. Or they said, oh, that's a general real estate idea. But Wiley was interested in doing a deal with me. And they said, well, look, like we're not interested in that idea, but we're interested in you. Here's a book idea. We need a proposal. And they even walked me through and we went back and forth creating the proposal. I hired people to edit it. And then after they got it, I thought the book contract was the next thing coming, but it was a rejection saying the marketing department doesn't think you'll sell enough books to give you a deal. So good luck kind of thing.
Oh, man. God, like psych, like here, we handed it to you, you develop it, and then nothing.
Yeah, it was, I mean, at the time I was really devastated. I cried and, I didn't understand because I had friends that got book deals. Like, what did they have that I didn't have? But really it was it was really, truly a gift because I kind of had to look myself in the eye and go, do you really care about writing a book? And I did. And I went back to the original book idea that I had. And I wrote that book because I knew at the time people were writing a lot of get rich in real estate type books, but nobody was really talking about the things that I'd experienced if you buy the wrong properties, if you're not prepared for some of the challenges, like if you have properties in a bunch of different cities like I did, you're relying on property managers. Well, I paid for a roof that never got repaired because I didn't know to ask for before and after pictures. And, there was a lot of things that nobody taught me, and everybody was teaching you how to pick properties and get rich, but nobody was saying, hey, look, like some of these decisions may not fit with the life you're trying to create. And so that was the book that I wrote. And I believe that even if there was a few people who could avoid some of the drama that I'd gone through, that would make it worth it. But Wiley gave me the gift because I went, well, I'm going to have to self-publish this book. So I got to write the book I wanted to write, and I decided to do it better than if Wiley had published me. So I ended up taking it to #1 on Amazon in print books. So I was ahead of Dan Brown, ahead of Game of Thrones, and sat in the top 100 print books for 45 days, largely fueled by, I'm going to do it better.
What were some of the things that you did that led it to, in retrospect now, looking back on it, why do you think it did as well as it did?
I mean, one part luck. There is timing that you can't control in the world. There wasn't any other blockbuster hits coming out at the same time. But it was also, I had built a network of people this was all in Canada at the time. I'm in Vegas now, but I had a network of people who were excited to have a book that was Canadian focused, that was also going to talk about the drawbacks and the positives. And so I had a lot of mortgage brokers and a lot of real estate agents who were really excited to give copies of this book to their clients so that they could stop, if they get somebody who's hot off one of those get rich quick courses, they could go, hey, look, like, I know you're excited to send out those yellow letters, but here's a book that will walk you through all the fun you could be in for if you stay down this path. And so the network, combined with people being excited to have a book that really was about the real risks and the real rewards, that combination was really powerful.
So at the time, this is about almost 10 years ago now, you had real estate investments that you'd done, and you also had an education and training company. Why do a book? Why then? What were you hoping to get out of it?
Well, when you look, I mean, for me, I think the book was that next step in my credibility and my expertise. And when you look on television, for example, the news shows, they're not putting, it's a little bit different now. You see a little bit more of the podcaster, blogger type thing, but most of the time the credentials are author, right? Or they're a PhD, that kind of thing. So for me, it was that next level of, I want to be seen as an expert in this. And I also believe deeply that I could help more people with a book that was $20 versus the $10,000 mastermind that I had, that people could join in the training and education. I really believe that the book had bigger impact potential.
Yeah. And did you find that? Like, tell me a little bit about, like, after you put out the book, some ways in which it opened doors for you. Did you get speaking gigs? Did you get, people coming up to you and thanking you for the book? What was that like?
I still get emails to this day of people reading the book and saying, thank you for writing it. And they still say it holds true, a decade later. But yeah, it was really eye-opening. The biggest thing was my training and education company. It was always a bit of a grind to fill all the programs. We usually filled them, but it was a bit of a grind. And our programs were filling up before we were even, announcing them in a lot of cases. We were full, so we were able to raise prices. But we also raised a lot of capital. Like, people out of nowhere were calling us saying, I have $250,000. Can I invest with you? So the book getting out there, and I want to be clear, that didn't happen the next day. This was, 6 months to 12 months after the book came out. These things were happening. And I was on television programs all across Canada. I always got the morning program though, and I had to be in the green room before 6 o'clock. I started turning them down because I thought that was really gross, having to sound intelligent at 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
But it was cool. It didn't sell books, being on news, but it was great for social media, great for credibility, being able to show your picture sitting in the studio at one of the national networks was pretty cool.
Yeah. In our business, we did something similar where we did small group format masterminds, charging people a lot of money to come get on a plane, fly somewhere. And those are hard to fill. So anything that can help with that is definitely appreciated. I wanted to ask you now, so it's been 9-10 years since you published the book. You mentioned that a moment ago. We've got podcasts now, we've got YouTube, we got TikTok, social media, we got all this kind of stuff that's out there now. I guess I'll just ask a broad question. So are books still relevant in that world with all these different marketing channels out there?
Yeah, I believe they are, because it's part of the whole ecosystem. And a book has a really long shelf life, like literally and figuratively. Like, it's one of those things where people rarely will throw a book out, but they'll pass it. They'll give it to a friend. They'll, that physical book. And by the way, physical books still are selling in the nonfiction categories. 60-70% of most of our authors are selling in print. And then the rest of it's made up between audio and ebook. So print books still are the preferred format for the vast majority of nonfiction readers. I think because it's like that resource or that thing that they're going to touch and, pass around and, I don't know, the physical, tactile thing. But yeah, so I do think it's an important piece. And then it also, the thought process of creating a book gets clarity around your message and the content in a way that very few other formats do. And I'm really big into YouTube, and I take my YouTube scripts and put them into a book format. And then I look at what's missing and I shoot more videos to fill in the gaps. But then, there's a whole editing process that creates massive clarity and refines my content and my message to a level that it wasn't before that stage. And I think that then goes out into your marketing, that creates more content that goes out into the world and opens the door to speaking. Because nobody on a speaking sheet goes, what podcast do you have? They go, what books have you written, on those speaker forms to get speaking events. So I think it's powerful, but I also think it's not the only thing that you should be doing.
Yeah. So you start the company, Book Launchers, around the time that it's actually kind of an interesting story. You decided you wanted to move to the States, and you could have purchased a business in order to open that door, but you decided to start a business instead. Why did you decide to help others with starting a book?
Yeah, there was lots of factors to it. I looked at a few businesses, and I just kept thinking, every business has problems, and I really thought I might as well be the creator of my problems rather than go in and fix somebody else's. And so that was part one. This, after looking at a bunch of businesses, nothing got me excited. And part two of it was that there was kind of this nagging feeling behind, in the back of my head going, you can help people with self-publishing. Because I had coached some people in the real estate space on their books, and I had done a lot of research in order to go into this. But there was also that imposter syndrome, like self-doubt of, well, you're a real estate investor with an MBA in finance. What do you know about book publishing? So I finally had to kick that imposter to the curb and created the company I would have wanted to hire. And addressed kind of the pieces in between. But it was about a 1.5-year journey of research and applying for the visa and then deciding not to buy a business and go into it. But it was good. I'm glad I did this.
Yeah. And so talk about who it's a fit for, because, writing a book is such a big project. It's such a massive undertaking. Even if you were to outsource as much as possible, you still have to have, I'm sure your clients are still, active participants in many different pieces of it. So how do you sort out who's the right fit to actually even do the book, and what do you need from them, these days?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for us, the person who's a great fit is writing the book with a bigger picture goal in mind. And their singular goal isn't to sell books, because it's a hard world to just try to make income off of selling a book and not having it be a part of an ecosystem. So our ideal person has a business, or they're exiting a business and starting a new one, that kind of thing. And they're doing this because they do want to get on stages or, improve their consulting leads, or they're using it as a tool to generate leads to sell their product or their service or their software. And so those are our ideal client. It is still, you're right on though, it's still an effort. And the one thing I always tell our clients is, if you're not going to be able to dedicate 2 to 5 hours most weeks for at least a year to this project, you're not going to have a book at the end of it that you're really happy with. You can still get a book, but it's going to be missing something, whether that something is you or the quality or something else. Because it is, even with us trying to do as much of it for them as possible, it really is still a big project that you have to be committed to.
Yeah, that's such a hard one, isn't it? To sort out who you think is going to be able to make it to the finish line. It's like predicting who's going to make it to the end of a marathon, you don't really know until they get there.
The person that has clarity of goal and vision as to why they're doing it, though, is more likely. And I've definitely seen that over the 5 years. When somebody comes in and they're just like, I want to be a bestseller, and that's their vision, they're usually the person who drops off halfway versus the person who's like, okay, I'm going after this type of person. This book is going to help them do this. And here's how it's going to fit into my bigger business vision. That person, I wouldn't say always finishes, but they're much more likely to get across the finish line.
Tell me about the vision for the client who came in, and you ended up with the title Marijuana Hater's Guide to Making $1 Billion in Hemp. Best title ever. A really interesting story. Tell us about that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, the title says a lot of the story is he was somebody who was very anti-marijuana his entire life, like was really against it. And as he was getting into more and more investing in business, he kept coming across these hemp opportunities. And so he ended up traveling around the world, learning all there was to learn about, growing hemp, cultivating it, investing in it, financing it, because it's been a whole journey just figuring out how to finance businesses in the hemp industry. And he brought all of that to a book that he wanted to use essentially as a calling card, but also to kind of share what he had learned in that. And it's been really fun because from the minute that book came out, he's been so busy, he's barely had time to market the book, but the book sells. I think partly because of the catchy title. And also, it's a new industry that he had really cool information and knowledge and expertise to share in.
Yeah. And then I'm curious, like, did he have the vision that you would wrap it around this idea of the marijuana haters guide? Or is that something where you're like, this is something really unique about it. We're going to take the fact that you hated marijuana and now, you're helping others to make money in this industry or in the extension of it.
Yeah, honestly, I don't remember where the ideas come from because we have a brainstorming process. And so some of this will come from our client, some will come from us, and it's a joint effort. I do believe he had the haters. He came in kind of saying I was a marijuana hater. And I think the idea evolved from there. And that's how everything is with us, is we're fairly organic and we work with the client to brainstorm and to uncover things. So I would never say this was us. And I would, I'd rather give the credit to him, honestly, and say it was all him.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, he had to pick it.
Right. Another interesting one is you have a client that was an accountant who wrote a book about creativity. That's very different too. So talk about that one.
Yeah, that's Robert Bell, Blow the Lid Off. And this was a fun one too, because again, like you said, he's an accountant. He comes in, he's talking about creativity, which is, you don't usually think of accountants and creativity going hand in hand. But the book itself isn't necessarily the story. It's what he did with the book. And so he's actually in South Africa. And he was doing these interviews mostly through podcasts because that was the easiest kind of form of book marketing for him. And little bit as he did these interviews, it wasn't just that he was doing all the podcast interviews that he could find and that we brought him. He was also listening really carefully to things that people would lean into and go, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And he also ran into a podcast that kind of opened the door to pitching a TED Global Ideas talk. And so the combination of listening to what people had been interested in and this, just this little opportunity, he ended up pitching the idea of us having emotions behind our money as a talk for TED Global Ideas. And he got it. And his video's been viewed more than 2.5 million times. And he's doing all kinds of incredible things in Africa. He's won all kinds of awards. And it's been a really fun thing to watch because it wasn't necessarily the book, but it's what he did with the book.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of listening to books on Audible. My business partner, Jeremy, kind of really turned me on to that. He's a huge Audible fan. So I love that you also focus on turning books into audiobooks. You also help people with turning books into online courses. So let's talk a little bit about that, about some of the ways of taking it from book and then taking it even further into other applications or other channels.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about books is it can create the foundation for a lot of other formats and a lot of other content. So a lot of our books also become workbooks, and that can be supplementary. It can be part of the course that they may or may not teach or workshops. I think, as a side note, audiobooks, I didn't used to say it was a must, but I would say now it's really becoming a must, especially if you have an entrepreneurial audience. They're largely buying in audiobook format now. And some of our business focused books, we're seeing them 40% of their sales are in audiobooks. So if you're not creating an audiobook, you're missing out on a big chunk of the market. And that's the actual part of the market that's growing. But course wise, I mean, my background is, I created a training and education company and I licensed off all the courses when I exited. And so I get kind of that course structure, and books naturally lend themselves, most books, not all, but most books naturally lend themselves to becoming a course, but the format has to change because a book is designed to be consumed. Of course, we want our readers to take action, but it's designed to be consumed versus a course should be designed to have somebody take action. And so how you deliver that is slightly different, and how you have them teach it and go through it, or how you have them learn it and go through it, is slightly different. So you provide different resources and different tools, and slightly different format, but the content can be almost exactly the same, and people will pay for it because it allows them to take the next step, which is taking action on what they've just read.
Okay, so take me through, if you have a new client coming to you who says, I'm not that much on social media. I haven't built these channels. I don't have an email list, but I want to put a book out into the world. Where do you start with someone like that? What do you tell them to do?
The first thing I want to understand is their goals. Because if they're coming to me saying all of these things that they don't have, and at the same time they're saying, I want to be a Wall Street Journal bestseller, they have a gap that is really big to fill. Versus if they're saying they want to use the book as a tool to get on media, to get speaking engagements, as a lead generator for their business. Now that's something that you don't need social media for. You don't need to have an email list to start off with, because the book will be the thing that helps you build it. So that's the first most important thing, because if I have somebody that doesn't have anything as far as an audience or platform, but they're expecting to sell 10,000 books in their, 7 to 10,000 in their launch week, I don't know how they're going to fill that gap unless they have a really, really strong network of people who do have those readers in their audience already. So that's where we go first, and that's where we see where the gap is that we have to fill.
Yeah. And then as far as the actual launch of the book goes, it's funny. We get some clients who are so fixated on the launch of their podcast. And a lot of times we have to kind of talk them back from that and say, it's a long game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Don't worry too much. It's probably going to be crickets or, your mom, your grandma listening in the beginning. What do you say to people that come to you that are kind of focused on that launch piece? Or is that, do you say that we got to be all out, got to put all our effort into that?
I mean, again, it goes back to their goals and the intention behind the book. But I mean, our best clients are the ones that are going to use this book as a tool, and they may want to have that big launch, which is great. It builds momentum. It can help. But that's not their number one focus, right? They're not all about being the bestseller. They're all about the book getting them those other things. And that's where we tend to focus. And most of the time, if you do the right things, I mean, at the very least, you're going to see the Amazon bestseller flag, because that's actually quite easy to get if you line up a few pieces in the beginning. The bigger lists are a little bit harder and take more orchestrated efforts to achieve those. But I would say I'm a longer term kind of goal person. So by nature, I find a lot of our clients they like to have the bestseller, but that's not the most important thing. That's not how they're measuring success. The success is coming in, what's it doing for my business and my speaking gigs and those things.
Yeah. And are those, I've known a lot of people over the years that have aimed for the New York Times bestseller list, Wall Street Journal bestseller list, USA Today list. I haven't kept tabs of it recently. Are they still achievable with with endless resources, or is it something that is, kind of a wild card? Because I've known some people that put a lot of money into it and then they still haven't hit the mark for whatever reason, even if they sold. The crazy story, sometimes you hear people have sold more books in a particular week than others, and they didn't hit those lists.
Yeah. I mean, New York Times, if you're self-publishing, it's not a factor. It's a curated list. It's the editors choose which books go on it. So there's a lot of books, really good books out there that never make the New York Times bestseller list, but they outsell the ones that did by, sometimes a 4 factor. So it's, that's not a factor for self-published books. And even if you're not published with the top 5, or if you lean the wrong way politically, it's very much a curated list. The other lists, though, are more sales lists, and you still do have the opportunity, but it is one of those things where it's relative to who's coming out that week. So, if you're up against a big, serial book that's people have been waiting for, or somebody else, I'm trying to think of what some of the big ones coming out here are. I'm drawing a blank, but if you're
John
up against
Grisham
one of
or
them,
something like that, yeah,
or even in the nonfiction space, like if you
Malcolm
are
Gladwell,
coming out,
yeah,
exactly, you're coming out at one of the big names or one of these big memoirs that everybody's waiting for, you're going to have a tough fall to compete against them. And sometimes you can plan for those because you can see where the publishers have the big launches, but they can move the launch on you, all kinds of things. So there's luck involved. You can make it. We've had authors hitting it 7,000 copies in a week. 5,000 even sometimes can do it on some of the lists, depending on timing and things like that. But you have to really understand what you think it's going to do for you to put the focus solely on that event. Because you're right, you don't have control over whether you actually hit it or not.
Yeah, right. I want to wrap things up. The question that I always ask is, I call it my gratitude question, but books have an acknowledgement section. And I always love reading the acknowledgement sections because I like to see who are they grateful to when they put out their book. So who appears in your acknowledgement section as a just thank you? Who would you want to call out and thank for helping you along the way?
I mean, my team at Book Launchers they're phenomenal. And again, I was a real estate investor who started a book publishing company. So clearly I had to hire people who knew what they were doing so that they could help me create this. But I know you're a part of EO too, and I've had so many people in that organization that have helped me. Chris Kremotsis got me in it. He's the founder of Podfest. He got me into it in the first place and introduced me to some really great people there. And then, from that, there's so many people inside of EO that have just had a tremendous impact on my life in a short period of time. So my acknowledgement page would be many pages long, but those are some. Yeah,
Chris is great. I've had him as a guest on this podcast. He's a great guy. Well, thanks, Julie. This has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you and your YouTube channel, your website, all that kind of stuff? The books too.
Yeah, booklaunchers.com will get you most of it. And then booklaunchers.tv is my YouTube channel. And that's where I hang out. So if you want to leave a comment there, it's me that replies. That's my hangout zone.
Yeah. And Self-Publish and Succeed is one of your books, right?
Yeah. It's the latest one. It's our hashtag No Boring Books process to write a book people want to read and that will sell. And we have a new one coming out next year on book marketing. It's untitled as of yet, but it will be out in 2023.
Maybe the book marketing hater's guide to one of those types of format things. I like that. Yeah. Cool. Julie, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.